Welcome to a little bit of lab rat fun, networking with fish. If you're familiar with this channel, you already know that yesterday I put out a Spirent Test Center one, so you'll be noticing a theme. I'm going to be doing a bunch of traffic generation, YouTubes and blogs to kind of sort of help my peers and other people in the CPOCs around the world and within Cisco in trying to use a lot of this stuff because I get asked questions a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and Avlanche is a Spirent appliance that I have in the other room, and it does layer 4 through 7 traffic generation. Now, I will say that I tend to prefer for a lot of testing where I'm powering off a router, powering off a switch, pulling an ether channel link. I don't like layer 4 through 7 traffic generators. The reason is because I can't control them because they have their own brain. The TCP stack, layer 4 through 7, windowing, retries, stuff like that. So if I was actually doing a test between two switches and what the customer wanted to see was that I had an ether channel between them and pulling a link, I can see whether it's a tenth of a second or whatever it is, because with a packet blaster, I can see that because it's not having a conversation. So, but there are times where layer 4 through 7 is what we want. So I'm going to be building a base file similar to what I did with the Spirent Test Center yesterday. And the base file is going to have some HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, DNS, some other things, so that people can go ahead and take that and start it as a base. The code versions might be different, so we're going to go ahead and step through it here. So I have an RDP that I'm going to session into where the application rides. The Avlanche is an appliance that's in the lab in the other room. I've got a router in keeping with how I do things. If it's a dash line, that's a trunk port. If it's a solid line, that means that's just layer 3. And the reason why I do that is so that with the file that I'm creating, people can see what it looks like to have a VLAN and also what it looks like to not have a VLAN. The IP address of the chassis is 172.26.10.101. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on my VM, my RDP session, my Windows session, getting into, from that application, getting into that IP address and licensing and the port. So the first thing we're going to do is going to connect to the Avlanche chassis via the application, and we're going to license it. I already have the XML license, just showing you how you license it. And then we're going to reserve ports. There's multiple ports on here. I'm going to be reserving port 0 and 1 on the Avlanche side. And then we're going to tie port 0 to the client side. So Avlanche is an avalanche of clients. You don't have to necessarily have a client side and a server side, but that's what we're going to do to keep life simple for us. Is we're going to have a client, that's the one that's actually going to be initiating the HTTP, HTTPS, whatever, and then the server side. The server side will be pretending it's a HTTP server, HTTPS server, DNS server, FTP server, etc., etc. You can also have the client go against a real server, but in my lab, I'm going to be doing both sides. So we're going to tie port 0 to the client side, and we're going to tie port 1 to the server side. So let's go ahead and we're going to, again, connect to the chassis, make sure that the license is on, we're going to reserve ports, and then we're going to tie port 0 to the client side and port 1 to the server side. So let's go do that. I'm actually running Spirent Test Center application 4-7 application, and I'm running 4.4.3, which is a little old, but it works for what I need. So this is going to be the application, and I will then connect from this application to the chassis. So we're going to come up here. We'll go ahead and make this bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect to our appliance. So we're going to go ahead and do add appliance. That's 172.26.10.109. And add. Now what you'll see here is this is the IP address. This is the model that I'm running. the number of CPUs. Most importantly to me is typically the product version number, so that I know that the application that I'm using, the GUI that I'm using on this PC, is actually going to be the same as on the appliance itself. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click close. So after we connect to the chassis, we're supposed to deal with licensing. So if we come back up to administration and look at licensing, I've actually already uploaded my license, which I am not letting you see here. But what we could have done is we could have done an add and a browse, and then we could have found another license. That's just how to do the license. Obviously, I'm not showing you my stuff. So the next thing I'm supposed to do is we're supposed to reserve the ports. So we're going to go to user administration. I'm going to expand, and I said that we were going to reserve these 2 ports. So let's go ahead and reserve these 2. And then go ahead and close. Now the next thing I said was that we were going to go ahead and tie the port 0 to the client and port 1 to the server. But in order to do that, I actually have to start a new project. So we're going to call it Fun with Fish, and then project name, finish. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a new test. And so the test is just going to be more fun. And next. Now, like I said before, we can have the appliance emulate clients only. This is typical for people who are buying the Spirent to go up against their real servers. But I'm actually going to have my appliance on those 2 ports act as the client and the server. So if we go ahead and go next, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run advanced test because I've been using this tool for a long time. And I know exactly what I want and how to get it done. Now from this perspective, what's going to come up is a series of tabs. This is the client tab, and so this is the main client tab, so all of these sub tabs have to do with the client. This is the server tab, and so all of the sub tabs have to do with the server side. So you're kind of sort of programming the client side of the appliance and then programming the server side of the appliance. So from that perspective, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to client first, and we're going to do ports, because I said we're going to tie port 0 to the client side. So that means I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a port over here, and it's already going to go ahead and be port 0. I could have chosen port 1, but it's going to look at what I already have. So I'm tying, by doing this, I'm in the client main tab, I'm in ports, and I'm adding the port. So now we have tied that port to the client side, or if you can think of it this perspective, there's the appliance, and we have client code, it's going to sit on top of that port, and then server code is going to sit on top of that port. Server code, instructions, whatever. So let's go to the server side, and again, go to ports, and we're going to add a port. Now what you'll notice is that 0:0, port 0 is no longer there. So that's it. And so now we have, that was it. It was extremely exciting. So we've done the initial steps of doing this. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stop focusing on the Avlanche side and reserving the ports. What we're going to do now is on the client side, in the client tab, we're going to create a subnet that's going to sit on top of that port, which is going to act as an HTTP client, but later on. And it's going to be VLAN 10, and it's going to be in subnet 10.1.11.0. As you can see from my diagram here, I'm going to be making .101 be the, I'm just going to have one device over there, one client, one server for right now. And so I'm going to make it 101. So if you have ever watched any of my YouTubes or have worked with me in CPOC, what I tend to do is I make 101 the 4th octet for something that I know is going to be a traffic generator. And then we're also going to create a subnet on the server side. So let's go do that. So going back over here. So on the client side, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go to subnets. It's all extremely exciting. So what I tend to do is I just copy the row. The reason why I copy the row is because I've been using this for a long time, and sometimes I've messed up the default. And then, so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to have client VLAN 11, and then it's going to be 10.1.11. And if you notice, this is actually a range, right? So I'm making a range. So I'm going to go ahead and have it be 101 to 10.1.11.101 for right now. It's not very exciting. Mask is 24, but this is a range. It will let you know when it's doing that. This is the network. I want to have a default gateway. It's 10.1.11.1. I also want to have a VLAN. So on the VLAN, what I want to have is I want a VLAN on this, and the VLAN is going to be VLAN 11. So we have now created that subnet. So let's go ahead and go over to the server side and go to subnets, and we're going to do the same thing that I normally do. And this is server 21. And this is actually 10.2.21.0. And you can see it doesn't say range. It will say range later on when we do something else, but this is just what's the subnet. Now, when you say default gateway, this does bother me a little bit, but it's not overly horrible. I'm just going to go ahead and have to change that. I'm not going to do VLAN because I want to be able to have one example of one that's a VLAN and one example that's one of not a VLAN. So the next thing we're supposed to do is we're supposed to copy the default action list over something called HTTP. So what is an action list? So an action list, if we come over here, if we think of an action, if we're talking about HTTP, it's going to be the client initiating the HTTP. So the action will be over on the client side. When I talk about default, if you see here, what we actually have is we have this. I love this. What I really like about this is all the different examples that already have little, they're commented out. So what I tend to do is I tend to just go ahead and kind of like that copying of the subnets, I just create my own. So it's HTTP and then uncomment additional lines, right? And so it makes it real simple to understand. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to go to 10.2.21.101. Now there is something that I'm going to do. You know those things where you don't necessarily know if you have to do something anymore, but you just do it because you've been doing it for years? Years and years and years ago, back when dinosaurs ruled the world. I was new to the predecessor of this. Spirent had bought this from Caw. And there was a code version thing where I wanted to get just a ton of traffic going, tons and tons and tons of traffic. And what was happening was it needed like 10 of them because it was doing this kind of sort of like bus parallel stuff. So it needed more than just one set of instructions. So I've always done this now. So I make one and then I go ahead and I make multiples. And so that's what I do. So now what I've done is I've told the client, whoops, daisy. So we copied the default action over to something called HTTP, and I tweaked it. So we modified the HTTP to go to 10.2.21.101. So now I'm going to make the variant associations to make that work. So what do I mean by the variant associations? Well, I have the ports, created the ports, right? So I made ports, and then I made subnets, but I haven't tied the ports to the subnets. So now you can kind of sort of understand what the associations tab is. So I want to add an association, and what I want to do is I want it to be, this is the client tab, so I want HTTP because that's the action I want to have. The profile is a default profile, we can talk about that later. And I want to use this port and I want to use the subnet. So what I'm doing is I created the port, I created the action list, and I already associated port 0 with the client. So all I'm doing is I'm just kind of sort of putting it all together. So I'm saying port 0 is going to have this client running on top of it, and this client's going to call that action list. Simple. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over to the server, go to associations, and then add an association. And I don't have anything over here right now, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to associate this with, oh, serve 21. Okay, that's fine. And now we're going to have a range because I mentioned before, you noticed before that 10.2.21, I wasn't given a range before. So now we're going to go ahead and go 101-10.2.21.101. And that's it. So that's my range. Now, what's this profile here? This profile is a default profile. So what does that mean? So over here, I told you to ignore this default profile because it's this, and that's okay because I'm doing HTTP over here. But over here, what we need to do is back over the server tab. So it says profile, it's a default. So what do? Well, the default over here is already doing HTTP, but I'm going to want to be more specific about that so I can troubleshoot. So again, I'm going to copy HTTP. If I could just spell it right, that'd be great. Now, the thing about a layer 4 through 7 traffic generator is it is much different than a packet blaster. You have to tell the device drivers, the TCP device drivers, what all of their instructions are, which means, are you doing 1.0? Are you doing 1.1? Are you doing keep alives? How do you want to end the connection? And also, actually, a lot of like, what do you want to do is retries, what port number do you want to go to? Everything, okay? So now, we're going to come back here and we're going to change this from default to HTTP. So in theory, I now have everything that I need. I have port 0 associated with the client. And let's get back over and review. So I have port 0 associated with subnet client. That's going to do HTTP. If we go back over to HTTP, it's trying to do a get to 10.2.21.101. So it looks like the client side is ready. Server side, we have the port, which is port 1, and this is its subnet, and this is its range. And it is associated with profile HTTP. So in theory, I should be able to click a button and see tons and tons of traffic. But I don't do it that way, not the first time. If you come up here, there's a little play button with a check. Trial run the test. Okay, so trial run the test. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to trial run the test. When you trial run the test, one of the things that I love about trial running the test is the fact that you actually can get a PCAP, which can help you understand what is it that's going on. So there we go. The test is over. It's completed. You know it's completed when the client side is all 5s and the server side is all 5s. And when you can press these buttons again. Now, just to let you know, if we go over to results and you click more fun, so this is the connections attempted, this is the connections that were successful, the total HTTP. If this had not worked, what you can do is you can actually go over to one of the PCAPs and you can open it up and look at it. What I expected possibly was that when we cabled up, and by we I mean one of the college interns, when we cabled this up, it's possible that maybe port 0 got connected to the wrong end of the router and I had my devices swapped. So I figured it was a 50-50 chance we were going to have to look at those PCAPs. And when I look at those PCAPs, what I'm typically looking for is who else, the first thing I'm looking for is who else is on that subnet. Am I on the right subnet? Okay. Now the next thing we can do is we can go ahead and go back to client. So now that we know that this is going to work, and we can do load. Now this is a little confusing when you're new to it. I've been playing with this for eons, since dinosaurs roamed the world. So I'm going to do simulated users, which means that I'm going to simulate that I want a number of users going ahead and doing and this, by the way, this is something that we use for, this can be used for anything like NBAR, ABC. I use this nowadays for, I used to use this a lot for ASAs. I use this a lot nowadays for Stealth Watch, for anything that's gathering telemetry and needs real traffic, lots of things like that. So I don't tend to slam it. As you can see, this is just 110 simulated users, at a time. And so what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and run it. And you can see it says the green arrow right here shows you that you're in this ramp up state. The reason why I used to have a longer ramp up state is because I used to also use this tool when I used to play with SLB, iOS SLB, the Cisco CSS, the Cisco CSM, the content switch module. And what would happen is, since I am the client side and the server side, when the server side starts up, I want it to be able to start up, and that would be a server farm, and then I would have a virtual IP address that has to probe it. So I would want to make sure that the VIP address and the route health injection of inserting the VIP address on behalf of that server farm was up and active. So sometimes I would actually have the delay stage actually be, 10, 20 seconds. I'm not doing that now because I just have those 2 ports, so I don't really have to do that. So what we can do is we can actually just go and we can click, and it brings us to the next step. Or I could have gone ahead and come down here. So this is the first step, step 0, which is delay. The next one is ramp up. I want to start ramping up. Now you can go ahead and you don't have to do this, right? We could have gone ahead and just said, this is a height of 10, ramp up. So get to 10, go from 0 simulated users per second to 10. And do it over 10 seconds. I would, again, sometimes do this if I had to sneak up on something or if I wanted some delay or whatever. Again, for our purposes, none of this matters, but I am going to go ahead and leave this. This is the default when you actually get into the Avlanche. This is the default setup. And so it's nice because a lot of people will use this. So this is over 5 times, go to this height. And you know what? I don't care. I'm gonna go ahead and just remove this one. And so I'm not gonna step it, right? So what's gonna happen is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start the initial delay, and I'll go ahead, let that go ahead and go for 5 seconds in case you forgot to turn. You might wanna do it 20 if you forgot to turn spanning tree port fast on, and these are your only ports that are coming up. Ramp up. So in 10 seconds, I want to get to, let's say, 50. Okay? So 50 simulated users at one specific time. It's not 50 simulated users per second. It's I want to have 50 simulated users going at the same time. And so then the next one is steady state. That's from here to here. That is for 40 seconds. I want to go ahead and go from there to there. To make our lives simple, we're going to go ahead and actually make that a 10. And we'll keep that as a 10. So 5 seconds for delay, 10 seconds for ramp up, 10 seconds to hold it, and ramp down. We'll just go ahead and say 5 seconds to ramp down. Now, for my HTTP, it's really fast, right? It's going to be send, get, and then ACK, and then 200, and then tear it down. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of stuff like a large FTP file transfer or whatever, and you don't want it to show up as failed, you don't want at the end of the load interval, you don't want to kick off some very large FTP file transfer and then not have a ramp down to allow it to successfully complete. So this test is going to take 30 seconds, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to run it. So I'm going to come to this button right up here, which is Run Test Now. And this takes a while, so get your coffee. So we're starting to actually kick it off. So this is the client and the server stepping up. So 1, 2, 3. So we're like, okay, we're starting up. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get ready, and bam, we're hitting it. So the elapsed time is 8 seconds. This is how much we have remaining. And for those of you who are looking at this and you work in CPOC, you can go down there and you can get the runtime statistics. And this is the client runtime statistics. This is desired is 50, current is 50, and all this other information. And this is the server side. But as you can see, we're going to be tearing down in 9 seconds, and I have no unsuccessfuls. So the other thing you can do is you can send out the results, you can look at the results. We are now done. So we can actually go to results. And so I'm going to click the right one, which is the one that has tons and tons and tons. And these are all the different things that you can look at. So let's just go ahead and say that you want to do the client summary. So go ahead and just click the view for client summary. And this will give you everything. I think it's like, I don't know how many pages. We're not going to go ahead and cover that now. You can go ahead and play with that as much as you want. Here's the HTTP summary, test-specific summaries. You can look at drops. You can look at everything. So it's just tons. You can also generate a PDF or an HTML, and when you generate a PDF or an HTML, you'll actually say everything that you want to actually have come out. So that's it. We've gone ahead and we've shown you, we show that the test works, and I'm going to go ahead and go back and create some HTTPS. I love using the HTTPS because I use that actually for StealthWatch to show crypto audit and crypto compliance things of things that are older HTTPS. We can also do DNS and FTP, so I'm going to go ahead and build all that. Then I'll come back and I'll show you what it all looks like. And I'll also show you a PCAP. Have a good day. I'm out. See ya.